Hey everybody, welcome back for another deep dive with us. Today we're going to be looking at this really fascinating article
Hmm.
by Rashad Ferguson. It's called Deconstructing the Mainstream Narrative, and it kind of gets into
Yeah,
some really interesting points about Black motherhood in our society.
absolutely. And kind of those perceptions that we have of it.
Yeah, and I think Ferguson's main argument is that class plays like a huge role in how we view Black motherhood.
Yeah, that's right.
So let's get into it.
Hmm.
So Ferguson uses Erykah Badu as kind of a prime example here.
Right,
Um, she's very open about having three children with three different fathers.
right.
And like a lot of times this is framed as like empowering,
Yeah.
especially in that, that Breakfast Club interview that she did that was
What?
kind of went viral a while back.
Absolutely.
And so Ferguson kind of points out, how different do you think that reaction would be if we were talking about like a working class Black woman in the same situation?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great point that he brings up in the article about that contrast.
Yeah. So on the surface, we're like, oh, this is so great.
Yeah.
She's making these choices for herself.
It's liberating.
Yeah. But like what's lurking beneath that perception?
Well, I think what Ferguson's saying is that because of her wealth and status, she's kind of insulated
Yeah.
from all the kind of scrutiny and the systemic punishments that so many other Black mothers face,
Totally.
especially, Black mothers who are struggling financially.
Yeah. So like welfare restrictions,
Mhm.
yeah,
Court battles,
housing discrimination.
job instability, all of these things that so many other Black mothers have to contend with.
Yeah. It's like we're holding these women to completely different standards based on,
Yeah,
you know,
totally.
how much money they have.
Yeah, it's that classist hypocrisy
Yeah.
that Ferguson's talking about.
Totally.
Yeah.
And to like fully understand this, we need to go back,
Yeah.
a little bit historically. Do you remember like the Moynihan Report
Oh,
from
absolutely.
the 1960s?
And then later on, you have Reagan's welfare queen myth.
Yes.
These were basically propaganda campaigns that were disguised as like,
Totally.
social science or political rhetoric.
Yeah, it was like to demonize Black single mothers.
Right.
And then justify all these policies that would
Totally.
harm Black families.
Exactly.
And it seems like those narratives are still circulating today.
Oh, absolutely. They're so pervasive.
Yeah, like shaping how we view and treat
Mm-hmm.
Black mothers.
Absolutely. So while someone like Badu might be praised for, her kind of unconventional choices,
Right.
you have so many other Black mothers who are constantly being judged and policed for like every decision that they make.
Yeah, Ferguson even describes them as like hyper visible. Their lives are under like a microscope.
That's right.
They're subject to constant surveillance and suspicion.
Yeah, and he has this one line where he says, "For the masses, transparency isn't a luxury. It's often forced through economic conditions, state surveillance, and societal judgment."
Ugh, that's so powerful.
It's so powerful.
And it speaks to this larger system of like racial capitalism that he's arguing is kind of at play here.
That's right.
And this system basically criminalizes poverty
Yeah.
while protecting,
Yeah.
and rewarding wealth.
Exactly.
And that brings us back to that stark contrast
Yeah.
between what Badu's life is like
Yeah.
versus what like the average Black mother is facing.
It's not about individual choices.
Yeah.
It's about, access to resources and the
Yeah.
opportunities that you have.
Totally. And I guess that's where like the Badu example becomes so crucial
Yeah.
because it shows us how dangerous it is to just celebrate these individual stories without kind of acknowledging those bigger factors, those systemic factors that
Yeah.
are creating these like wildly different outcomes.
Totally.
So in a way, celebrating her choices as empowering
Yeah.
could actually be kind of misleading
In a way.
because it makes it seem like any Black mother could, escape hardship.
If they just, had that same outlook.
Yeah, if they just had the right attitude or whatever.
Right.
Which is just,
Not realistic for so many people.
yeah, and this is where we have to be careful not to fall into that trap of like victim blaming,
Right.
It's not about individual willpower or resilience.
Exactly.
It's about recognizing that these systems we live under are
Yeah.
literally rigged against certain groups of people.
And that's what Ferguson's arguing, is that those
Yeah.
systemic barriers disproportionately affect
Right.
Black mothers, especially
Yeah.
those who are working class or poor.
And this ties back into that whole like harmful narrative that we were talking about earlier, that poverty equals like moral failing.
Absolutely.
We need to like challenge that at its core. So I think we should take a moment to like really process all of this. We've gone from Erykah Badu to the Moynihan Report to, racial capitalism.
Absolutely.
What's standing out to you so far?
Well, I think what's really striking me is how Ferguson manages to weave together personal experience with academic analysis. Like, he doesn't just present these dry facts and figures.
Yeah.
He brings that human element into it.
You're right. There's a real sense of urgency
Yeah.
in his writing.
Mm-hmm.
Like, he's not just, observing these issues from a distance.
Right.
He's deeply invested,
He wants to find solution.
in finding solutions.
Absolutely.
And I think that's what makes this piece so impactful.
Yeah.
He's not just telling us what's wrong.
Right.
He's pushing us to think critically about how we can, dismantle these harmful narratives
Yes.
and create a more equitable reality for Black mothers.
Exactly.
So how do we do that?
Right. That's the question.
Where do we even begin?
Well, I think one of the first steps is recognizing that there's no one-size-fits-all solution.
Yeah,
Like, the experiences of Black mothers are so incredibly diverse.
of course.
They're shaped by so many different factors, like
Yeah.
geography,
Family history.
education level,
Totally.
you name it.
Like, even earlier, we were focusing on the contrast between someone like Erykah Badu,
Right.
who has, significant financial resources,
Mm-hmm.
versus, those who are struggling to make ends meet.
Yeah,
But that's just like one piece of a much larger puzzle.
exactly. And that's why it's so important to avoid making
Yeah.
sweeping generalizations or assumptions.
Yeah. We need to be careful not to essentialize Black motherhood.
Absolutely.
It's so easy to fall into that trap of thinking about, identity categories
Mhm.
as monolithic,
Right.
when in reality, everyone's story is so unique and complex.
Exactly.
And this is where I think listening becomes really crucial.
Uh-huh.
We need to be willing to hear the stories of Black mothers from all walks of life
Absolutely.
without judgment.
Without preconceived notions.
Yeah. And Ferguson's article kind of touches on this too, doesn't it?
Yeah.
That the dominant narrative surrounding Black motherhood
Right.
often fails to capture the full spectrum of experiences.
He definitely hints at that.
Okay.
And he points out how these dominant narratives
Yeah.
often serve to justify policies and systems that actually harm Black families.
Why?
And he specifically calls out the family court system,
Oh, wow.
which he argues is often biased against low-income Black mothers.
That's an area we haven't really delved into yet.
Yeah.
Could you elaborate on that a bit? What does he say about the family court system?
Well, he argues that the system is often designed to punish poverty rather than provide support.
Okay.
So, for example, he talks about the challenges Black mothers face when it comes to child support enforcement,
Oh, wow.
like trying to actually get the fathers to pay child support.
That sounds incredibly stressful.
It is.
And it's like they're being penalized for simply not having the same financial resources as
Yeah.
their counterparts.
Exactly. And it creates this vicious cycle where these mothers are constantly struggling to stay afloat,
Right.
often facing impossible choices between providing for their children
Yeah.
and navigating a legal system that feels totally stacked against them.
It's just disheartening to think about how many Black mothers are forced to navigate these incredibly complex
Yeah.
and often hostile systems.
Yeah.
While someone like Erykah Badu, with all of her wealth and privilege, can just sidestep a lot of those challenges.
Right.
It really exposes those deep inequalities.
It absolutely does.
I love that.
And I think it speaks to the urgency of addressing these systemic issues. It's not enough to just celebrate individual success stories.
Yeah.
We need to create a world where all Black mothers have the opportunity to thrive.
Okay, so I'm hearing a couple of key themes emerging here.
Yeah.
First, we need to move beyond those monolithic representations of Black
Yes.
motherhood
Yeah.
and recognize that there's incredible diversity of experience
Exactly.
within that community.
Yeah.
And that means listening to and amplifying the voices of Black mothers from all walks of life,
Absolutely.
especially those whose stories are often marginalized or ignored.
Yes.
And secondly, we need to address the systemic inequalities
Yes.
that are creating these vast disparities in outcomes.
right.
We can't just focus on individual choices and behaviors.
Mm-hmm.
We have to dismantle the systems of oppression that are at the root of the problem.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing that these issues are interconnected
Yeah.
and that individual choices are often constrained by forces larger than ourselves.
So where do we go from here?
That's the question.
How do we translate these insights into action? What concrete steps can we take to create a more just and equitable world
Mm-hmm.
for Black mothers?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I don't think there's one easy answer.
Right.
But I do think it starts with education,
Yeah.
with having these difficult conversations. Mm-hmm.
And with being willing to challenge our own assumptions and biases.
You're so right. It's about being willing to get uncomfortable,
Yeah.
to sit with the complexity, and
Yeah.
to commit to doing the work,
Yes.
even when it's hard.
Absolutely. And it's about recognizing that this is not just the responsibility of Black mothers
Right.
or Black communities.
Yeah.
It's a collective responsibility
Yes.
that requires all of us to show up and do our part.
So what does that look like in practice?
Mm-hmm.
What are some tangible things we can do in our own lives to support this movement
Yeah.
towards justice and equity for Black mothers?
Well, I think for starters, we need to get informed,
Okay.
educate ourselves about the history of systemic racism
Mm-hmm.
and the ways in which it continues to impact Black communities today.
Right. That's a crucial foundation.
Yeah.
We can't dismantle something we don't understand.